Good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot for having me. I'm really pleased to be here and be able to share some thoughts with you about the urgent need to transition to sustainable agri-food systems. And I will focus in my talk on smallholder farming systems in the Global South. I will start with highlighting some of the major challenges that the agricultural sector is facing, and from there we will see that it's really clear that there's this urgent need to transition to a different way of doing things, a more sustainable way of doing things. We'll talk about some of the technological options that we have at our disposal to make that happen, and we'll focus on one in particular, which is the hybrid through potato seed technology. After that, I will bring us down a bit to reality and talk about the major limits and constraints that prevent smallholder farmers from adopting these technologies. And we'll talk about the importance of tailoring solutions to the context of these farmers to take away some of these constraints. And before concluding, I will show you what that process of tailoring may look like. So we'll start with what is for me the major challenge, and that is the growing human population. In the African continent, it is growing at alarming rates, and this leads to a tripling of the food demand that is foreseen in the next 30 years. Tripling of the food demand. Meeting those demands, of course, requires natural resources. And in other continents, those demands have been met importantly by increasing crop yields. Now, what we see in the African continent is that the yields are still lagging behind. And in recent years, yields have been stagnating. There is not a lot of progress. Now, what that means is that the growing demands, they have primarily been met so far by expansion of agricultural land. And that leads to the disappearance of natural vegetation. It leads to land degradation as well. And this picture from the northern Ethiopian highlands illustrates that trend. Now, these growing demands have to be met from a natural resource base that is already under enormous pressure. One way to think about that pressure is by using the concept of planetary boundaries. And that is depicted here on the slide. In green, we have what we call the safe operating space for a number of different natural resources and ecosystem services. Now we see, for example, that for many of these resources, we have surpassed the planetary boundaries. And that is indicated with the reddish colors on the slide. One example is biodiversity. We know that there is a huge decline in species richness. And because that is still ongoing, we know that that is jeopardizing the healthy functioning, the functioning of healthy ecosystems. Another example is that of the nutrient flows. Importantly, this is caused in part by the excessive use of nutrients in the agricultural sector. And this is leading to the pollution of several natural resources, such as groundwater or surface water, as you can see on the slide. A third example, and we'll talk a lot about that example today, is climate change. So also for the climate system, we have surpassed our planetary boundary. And it has become undeniable that climate change is negatively impacting our agroecosystems. And it does so because of changing weather patterns, but also because of the increased incidence of extreme events like heat waves. And also, in terms of crop yields, we know that climate change will have a big impact. This is a map showing you what we can expect in terms of potato yields globally. Now, interestingly, we can see from the colors that in many areas, the expected trend will be a decline in potato yields, the yellow to reddish colors. But we see that in some areas, there may also be an improvement in potato yields. And that is in particular due to increasing temperatures in currently cool climates. Now, overall, the agricultural sector is expected to be negatively impacted by climate change, but the agricultural sector is also responsible, in part, for climate change. And that is because the agricultural sector contributes about 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That is indicated in the pie chart in the greenish colors. It's about 18% of global greenhouse gas emissions for agriculture, forestry, and land use. Now, where does that leave us in terms of food security? Now, we see from this map that especially in the African continent, with colors in deep red, that in this continent, the percentage of the population that is facing severe food insecurity is between 20 and 35%. And if we look at the temporal trends, we also know that in recent years, actually we are not making progress towards the second sustainable development goal, the one of zero hunger. No, in recent years, food insecurity has been going up instead of going down. Now, based on this somewhat alarming introduction, I have to admit, I think it's very clear that there is indeed no time to waste. There is an urgent need to transition to more sustainable farming systems. Now, from the demand side, we can achieve a lot already by changing diets and reducing food waste. And from the supply side, I think it's very clear that we need to be able to produce more with less to meet growing demands without further environmental damage. And sustainable intensification in agriculture is a key strategy to achieve that. And luckily, we have many technologies at our disposal that can help us to sustainably intensify. I'm showing you here a couple of examples. We have, for example, legume green manures and fertilizer to deal with soil fertility. We have soil and water conservation measures that can be used to combat erosion, to make sure that the available water infiltrates in the soil. We have the integration of crop and livestock production to help us in the cycling of nutrients in a system. We have, of course, improved varieties. I think you'll hear a lot about that today and in the next couple of days. And I want to now have a look at one particular technological option that is interesting for addressing the food security challenge. And that is the technology of hybrid true potato seed. And it's obviously a technology in which HZPC and the potato sector at large sees a lot of promise. Now, because of the breeding system that is based on diploid inbred lines, the introduction of desired traits and the development of new varieties can go a lot faster than in the traditional breeding system. A second point is that with the use of seed, propagation goes much faster, and so the development of new planting material is also a lot quicker. A third point is that because of these faster rates, the potential for disease buildup is reduced, and that allows us to develop clean and high-quality starting material. And then finally, because seeds are obviously less bulky than tubers, also storage and transport is facilitated. Now, because of all these factors, it's believed that this technology holds a lot of potential also for the farming systems in East Africa in particular. In this region, potato is an important food and cash crop, and the crop is cultivated in these regions mostly by smallholder farmers who cultivate about 1 to 2 hectares at most. In this farming system, we are dealing with quite a number of important challenges in the potato sector, and many of them are related to diseases. Now, because of limited land availability, farmers make use of very short varieties, and obviously this leads to disease buildup in the fields. A second point is that farmers mostly use their own seed tubers that they keep on the farm, and because of that, they transmit diseases from one crop cycle to the next. Also on the markets, there is really a lack of clean planting material. And so all these factors together, they result in very large yield gaps and poor yields that often don't surpass 10 tons per hectare. Now, hybrid true potato seed, obviously, with all its features, can address some of these challenges because it can help us to be much faster in the development of new varieties that are, for example, disease resistant, and because the technology helps us to facilitate the access to clean planting material. Now, before we get too optimistic about technological options allowing us to solve complicated problems like food insecurity, I want to have a look with you at some of the realities on the ground when we work with smallholder farmers. Because what we see is that often these technological solutions, even though they have a large potential, what we see is that smallholder farmers often do not use them. So the adoption is often disappointingly low. Now, why is that? Well, at the farm level, smallholders, they deal with limited and also insecure access to resources, land, capital, labor resources. And also beyond the farm level, so at the larger scale, there's a range of institutional constraints, going from market failures to poor information flows, limited knowledge and capacity, you name it. Now, apart from these well-known factors, there are three other points that I would like to explain to you. And the first one is related to farm size. I already told you for the specific case of East Africa that farmers cultivate small areas. But also for the entire continent, actually the vast majority of farmers, they cultivate less than 2 hectares, and many farmers even have to make a living out of less than 1 hectare. Now, obviously, these small farm sizes, they limit the potential for these rural households to make a living out of farming, but they also limit the potential impact of an innovation. Because at field level, it could be that an innovation leads to large increases in yields, but at the farm level, that will not translate to a considerable increase in income or food production because of the sheer size of the farm. So obviously, that is a disincentive for farmers to adopt a new technology. A second disincentive is the one of risk. And I like to illustrate that with these 2 pictures of a soybean trial that we did in Mali. On the left, you see a crop that is really doing well, and it's just a few hundred meters further that exactly the same crop, exactly the same treatment basically failed. And so this huge variability in time and space and the risk that a crop would not respond is again a real disincentive for smallholder farmers who are not cushioned by insurances, etc., to start using something new. And then finally, the third point is the point of farm diversity. You see here 3 pictures of households that live in the same village in Zimbabwe, in this case. Now, we have an extremely poor family just living close to a family with access to some resources, and another family that has a larger area of land, a larger livestock herd, and we would call them a bit better off. Now, obviously, one technology that we would like to introduce to help farmers, it will not be a suitable option for all of these different types of households. So that is to say that there are no silver bullet solutions, if you like. And because of that, there is a need to really tailor options or solutions, technologies, to the context of particular farmers. And that process of tailoring is illustrated here. So we have technologies on the one hand, farm diversity on the other hand. Because of environmental factors, some technologies are suitable, some are not. And within the suitable technologies, some of them, they really match nicely with the farmer context. And in those cases, when we have that match, the likelihood of adoption is a lot higher. And so this process of matching technologies to context, that is what we call tailoring. Now, if we go back now to the technology of hybrid through potato seed, for that technology to have a real impact on farmers' income, on farmers' food security, we need to ask ourselves the question, how does that technology fit within the farming system, within the seed system in these areas? And so, for example, from an agronomy point of view, we need to know, okay, what are the best management practices? What will be the performance under farmer management? From a seed system point of view, we need to know how will we get the planting material to the farmers who may be very remotely. From a farming systems perspective, we need to know, okay, what are the criteria that farmers themselves find important when they decide whether or not they want to use a new technology. And definitely profitability will be part of that. And finally, from a broader context point of view, we should ask ourselves who may benefit, who may not benefit, and what could be potential business models for different types of actors along the value chain. So these types of questions are the questions that, with my group in Wageningen University, we try to find answers to. And we try to do that by using iterative cycles of research, which I try to depict on the slide. And we involve local actors, farmers, but also other actors along the value chain. We involve these actors in our research as collaborators, if you like. And we do that by conducting trials on farmers' fields with the farmers, evaluating the options based on the criteria of the farmers, and using then that information in discussions and negotiations with the different actors around the table. So with that, let me conclude. We started by having a look at the major challenges that we are faced with. And from that, we said, okay, there's really a need to urgently transition to other ways of doing things, more sustainable agri-food systems. We saw that there's a huge potential for technological innovations, but these technological innovations need to be tailored to the context. And one way of doing that is through participatory systems research that we use to co-design tailored options. So with that, I thank you very much for your attention, and I'm happy to discuss with you, to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Katrien. Wonderful to just in 15 minutes see what you're working on and what is possible. As you mentioned, if you have a question, please raise your hand and I will come and have your question so we can all hear it, also the people at home. So do not hesitate to do that. First of all, you showed us some examples. What is something that really excites you, also looking to the future? Is there one of these things that warms your heart?
Well, yes, several things I would say. So I work a lot with farming systems where crops and livestock are combined, and looking for ways to make that integration happen. That is really my passion, if you like. And so we work a lot on trying to introduce fodder crops in these systems.
Right.
And if you introduce these fodder crops, it's always a trade-off, because if you introduce a fodder crop, perhaps at the farm level you produce less food for the people, because you've allocated some land for the livestock. Yeah. But there are also what we call dual-purpose varieties in cereals, in legume crops, that produce food for the people and food for the livestock.
The best of both worlds.
Yeah.
I can see that could be your passion, because you're helping both. Okay,
yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
I know that there are some questions that we've received in the chat. Meanwhile, anyone here in the room has a question for Katrien, who may be working in a similar field or maybe working in one of these regions that she's talking about. For now, we're looking at the chat. Let's see, we have Bari from Pakistan, and he's asking, or it's mostly a remark, he says, climate changes are affecting Pakistan agriculture sector. Early heat waves in hilly areas have reduced the potato yields of Pakistan. That's a remark. Is that something that is specific to that region, or maybe you're familiar with? Like the hilly region, specifically, he mentioned, has caused some challenges for them.
I think those examples, you start to hear them more and more often. And so this is just one example, but I think across the world, this unpredictability of the
Right.
climate has become almost the norm, if you like. And yeah, I appreciate the difficulties that our Pakistani colleagues have faced, particularly this year. And I think farmers around the world are dealing with similar issues.
Yeah, hopefully we can make a bit of a change also in these couple of days to make new connections. Someone who didn't share their name but would like to know, do you believe that the hybrid true potato seed is the future?
The future. Well, I think it can play its role. There are still many questions to be solved, but in particular in the smallholder systems like in East Africa, I think there is many questions still to be answered, but if you look at it, it really holds potential. So yeah, I'm really curious to see how it will develop and what the impact will be.
Yeah. Well, we'll discuss this a little bit further during our panel discussion as well, which has some experts on this. And then finally, we have Sandeep from India for tailoring solutions. And I'm sure he mentioned like the different types of farmers that you mentioned in your presentation. What would be an ideal way to strategize that, like to how to find the right solution for the right type of farmer?
Yeah, so basically what we do in our work is we enter in this process. And so it is not something you figure out in a month or two. It's a process that you enter with the local farmers, and you try to understand so the differences between those farmers. And you see, okay, what is our basket of options that we can offer them, and together you figure out what fits where and how, what kind of modifications do you need to make it better fit to a certain context or another one.
So communication and experimenting is
so
one
experimenting is super important, and what we try to do is also engage farmers in that process of experimenting, so that they also, just gain experiential learning by trying things out.
So they're part of the process.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, wonderful. Anyone here who wants another question? I'm going to go to you. I'm going to put the iPad with all the chat questions away just to make it a little bit easier. For people online, you won't be seeing me for a second because we can't film everything in the room. I'm going over to this gentleman on the left, and please also tell me who you are and what you work for.
My name is Maurice. I'm working for HZPC. I've been very interested by your presentation, especially the map centered on Africa, where you see the distribution of access to food. And especially what I just wanted to notice, and I think it's important to remember that, is that the darkest areas, that was the Horn of Africa, that was part of the CEMAC region with the Congos, but also Guinea in the ECOWAS region. And I think that these three areas, what they share in common at least, is an political instability, where you have a disruption of the institutional activity. And this has impact on how can your client get letter of credits, for instance, and how is it about seed certification systems, which are not really improving quite a lot. So that's really burdens where we are no help for that. But I think it's good to help that, to keep that in mind. No. So it was just a remark.
Yeah, also as a part of what could be issues in those areas.
It's a burning issue, actually. It's a burning issue.
A burning issue, you say. You would agree? Thank you.
Thanks for that. I couldn't agree more. And I've over the past couple of years, I've been working a lot in Mali. Another terrible example. I can't go there anymore myself because of the instability. And you see, like, all the efforts that you've put in and all the efforts that our collaborators have put in. You just see that disappearing because of that institutional context. It's very, very frustrating. Yeah.
Yeah, so an extra challenge to take into account as well.
Yeah.
For now, we have to wrap up this, but you will be here later today as well. So if you have any questions for her, please don't hesitate to ask Katrien.